It is late on a Wednesday evening. I just got off of a long day of work, but it's all good because I'm sitting down with my colleague from the AG Pro team, Zachary Wallach, who is fresh off of his biggest victory of the year at the Arcane Games and Events Players Championship. He came out on top with $1,100, gold cold foil, and a PTI. Zach, congratulations.
Thank you so much, Bryce. It's always a pleasure to be here.
So glad to have you, and I'm sure it's going to be a blast talking about probably one of your favorite heroes at this point, one that you have certainly put in a lot of hours into. That hero is, of course, Enigma and Ledger of Ancestry, excuse me, who is actually not supposed to be your pick for the Players' Championship. Who did you intend to bring instead, Zach?
I was so close to bringing Acilio. I wanted to make it happen. And then in the lead up to the event, I was like, all right, plans to get everything at pre-release fell through, plans to get everything release night fell through because people just weren't pulling the stuff I needed. They kept
Mm-hmm.
pulling like all of their Earth cards, which is like, hey, cool for you if you need that, or your Runeblade cards. I needed like a lot of cards, and I wanted them max rarity too for the event. I didn't want to settle either. I came into the event planning, I'm either playing max rarity Acilio, or I'm playing Enigma as my backup.
Which is
And
honestly something I never thought I would hear you say, Zach, is an illusionist is my backup hero.
it's funny because I've said it in the past. People who knew me back when I lived in San Diego before I started pharmacy school probably know a little better. Where I used to say a little more often, if illusionists didn't exist, I'd be a wizard player. And with the new set and Acilio coming out, I was like, all right, I guess we're finally cashing in a little on that kind of route for me of wanting to play wizard since I never really grasped, or not grasped, more never really was attracted to Kano's playstyle or Icelander. It just wasn't really my jib. But something about Acilio is just you're on the gas. You are. I keep saying it to everyone. You are Tony Hawk pro skating all over your opponents just because everything you do with the deck is flashy. It's all the fun of like Prism's pop off turns, except that's what you're doing almost every turn. It's just so many like deep layers of sequencing, deck building, and just fun gimmicks. The only thing he's really lacking that I love more as well is just like board states, which you get a little with the sigils, but it's not quite to that same extent where Dromai is my all-time favorite deck, and that just has everything I want in a deck. Of you have a board state like throwing your goons at people and
Mm-hmm.
just running them over, and you're just building your little army and all my buddies and friends, and I love it.
No, the sigils are dope, but they're not a Tumulti on turn zero. That's for darn sure. Well, I think I speak for us both when I say I'm kind of glad that those cards didn't come in and that you held to your standard as a max rarity gamer because uh, who knows, maybe this win wouldn't have happened if we lived in that parallel universe.
Yeah, it was really funny going into the event and filling out the player profiles with one of the highlight questions being, "Who do you think is going to win?" Not counting yourself. And I think almost every day leading up into it, Chris Ayali kept going, "Zachary is going to win this event if his Acilio cards don't come in time."
See, I had seen Chris's player profile and read that answer, but I didn't know the subtext underneath it. I think I would have taken that bet with Chris, honestly. Um, so speaking of the lead up to the event, a very curious thing was happening in the AGE Discord. We said it a lot during the event, but all of the players at the Players Championship, for obvious reasons, are players you know. You've been playing them in the AGE Opens all year round. They're local players. You would just have to be in order to rack up enough points. But bottom line, these are faces you know. And in the AGE Discord, the day before, you were being a master in Microsoft Paint with the bracket in front of you, trying to figure out who was going to play what. How did your predictions shake out? And were they helpful to you in preparing for this event?
let's see. My predictions weren't totally aligned. Like, I remember expecting a lot more aurora or lightning in general, which I think actually surprised everyone at the event I talked to, including myself,
Myself
of just
included.
like the fact there was no one showed up on aurora, no one showed up on verdants, uh, just lightning wasn't there. There was a lot more enigma than people expected. Obviously, everyone thought that Charles Dunn would be on some count your blessings, ultra fatigue style deck, and instead he just showed up on Refractor Enigma. Uh, at least Talon kind of picked up the legacy in that honor of playing 9 Salvage Shot, 9 Count Your Blessings, 3 Remembrance, Fatigue Riptide.
I didn't think we were
Bless
ever going to
his
leave the venue,
soul.
honestly.
Watching that round 1 was one of the games of flesh and blood of all time I think I've ever seen. There was no winner, there was only someone who lost less.
Which is so funny you say that because there was a match that went longer than that match, and that was Colin Erickson versus poor Moises Lopez on Enigma. Never would I have
That's
seen the day that that happened either. Anyway, Zach, give me your overall impressions of that Sunday and what it felt like to ascend with one of your favorite. Even though it wasn't the deck you intended on bringing, it is got to be one of the heroes that is nearest and dearest to your heart.
Yeah, I honestly came into Sunday with very open expectations. I thought I would have a solid time. Round 1 started pretty shaky for me, when I imagine we'll get into that later. But compared to where I was last year of ending the Swiss portion of the season basically at number 1 seed and then going 0-3 crash in the actual Players Championship, and then going into this season where I think I actually love just like the development I had throughout the entire season, just the growth, especially starting in the January AG Open, where I had basically my worst tournament run I've ever had in a professional event. I went like 1-5, which was just absolutely brutal to me. I think there was a moment sitting there just like, even though it was the first event the entire season, just going, oh my god, everything is so much harder this season. And then just having to slowly do better every single month until, all right, I get a top 4. All right, I get an AG win. I finish the season, I think like 5th seed. I'm like, okay, we've bounced back, but the Players Championship is the Players Championship. Anything can happen. And going into it, just coming out very obviously very happy being the winner. I think a lot of prep work that I put into it and predictions I made paid off very nicely. I actually think the most heads up part or like prediction I made was, I can play the new Illusionist gloves, but I'm expecting some people to be on, like, more people than I would normally be happy with to be on Mechanologist of like Dash IE or Dash IO, and they're gonna be playing T-Bones. I'm like, no room gloves. These block. These stop T-Bones. And round 1, and when the deck list revealed and everyone's heroes revealed, I'm like, round 1, Tyler Horsepool, Dash IO. I'm like, and this has already paid off.
There you go. I That was one of the things I was going to ask you about actually, because I believe you were the only Enigma that didn't bring in Calming Gesture. We'll get into that in a second, but I would be remiss if I didn't give you a chance to jump on the soapbox and talk about the Haunted Pilot buff. For those that don't know what we're talking about, who maybe haven't seen your interviews throughout the season, what the heck is the Honda Pilot buff, and how does it work in such mysterious ways?
All right, to explain the Honda Pilot buff, for basically every AG and overall SoCal event that we travel around to, especially as a team or just a group of friends in uh, like the LA OC area, our good friend of the channel and teammate Anthony Pham has a Honda Pilot. It is a wonderful car that fits lots of people. It's very great for carpooling. And we have basically kind of a tradition or just ritual at this point of for every big event, and especially every AGE, everyone that wants to be part of the card pool just reaches out to him, and we have our staples of like me, Moises, obviously Anthony's the driver, and over time we would notice that people in the Honda Pilot carpool would do particularly well at tournaments, if not outright win them altogether. And it over time became this mystique of the Honda Pilot buff. You must be in the Honda Pilot to win this tournament. And I'm, I mean, the moment I was announced as the winner, I already heard Anthony from across the event hall going, Honda Pilot 100% undefeated in Players Championships.
It's amazing, and it's so befitting of Anthony Pham because he really is like the glue that holds both our team and like large swaths of the community together. He's Mr. Come to Locals, he's Mr. FM Boost, and he's also Mr. Honda Pilot Buff. It's important to mention though that the Honda Pilot Buff giveth and it taketh away because Anthony ended up I think going X3 with only one win and and losing out of this tournament, and he was the previous reigning champion. So he's been the first one to insist to me that it only works. It's like it's a ratio thing. It works for half the people in it, half the people in it get absolutely dome wrecked, which was maybe what was happening to you at the beginning of the year at AGE.
Yeah, that's the second half of the Honda Pilot buff. And it's why we arranged the way back. People who do better sit in the front, and the people who didn't do so well sit in the back.
There's an
Those are the
economy
people that
here.
kind of got sapped that event.
That's amazing. All right. Well, just a little sprinkling of communal fun there. I'm glad we got to chat about that. Let's talk about something else, Zach. Let's talk about this hero that has captured your heart pretty much from the moment she was spoiled, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Enigma is just one of those heroes where the moment it was revealed, I'm like, this is exactly almost perfect as a follow-up to Dromai for what I wanted out of a new illusionist. Because after Dromai hit Living Legend and left the game, I'm like, all right, I played New Prism for a hot minute, did well enough with it. There was just certain things about New Prism that didn't quite uh, click with me, or just weren't the playstyle I wanted out of the deck. The biggest thing being, if I'm playing Illusionist, I want to be able to swing at least one like free attack a turn.
Mm.
That just feels like so defining to the class. Whether it be OG Prism with Luminaris getting to just like swing something for free off Luminaris, even if it's just a single attack with an empty hand. Dromai could swing a single dragon every turn at minimum. And then you hit New Prism where it's alright, you can't swing for free with anything. You basically always have to have a 2-card hand. Or if you're playing Iris, you need, or even Refractor, you need it to hold a card to pitch to swing. It's a different kind of gameplay style. It's just something that didn't quite fit with me. And then they reveal Enigma. I'm like, the moment I read that first line of the hero text, your first spectral shield attack costs 1 less. I'm like, oh yeah, they knew exactly what I wanted.
This is it. They made this hero for me. That's cool, man. And so let's zoom out a little bit. Let's get a little bit competitive, shall we? Why should we play Enigma in the current meta?
Enigma's greatest strengths as a deck, in my opinion, come down to the fact of Illusionist as a whole class, in terms of being a board state focused deck. And that just tends to wrap a lot into Flesh and Blood as a whole, where having a board state that you can carry over turn to turn and tend to get a lot of value off of uh, is very powerful compared to your opponent kind of just having to draw their 4 or 5 card hand and see what they can do about it. Because as it stacks up, if your opponent only has 5 cards every turn, but you're developing 1 or 2 auras every turn, on top of your 4 or 5 card hand, you're just going to eventually outpace them, outflood them, and they just can't really hope to overcome that. And then you just make it harder and harder on their end to really catch up once you're throwing disruptive attacks like CNC or Weakest Link. You have your Miragai swinging for 8 or even 10 or more every turn. You have pummels to really just kind of drive it home. It just builds over time where you start kind of weak because you don't have anything to attack with. You have to actually play out your auras. Their first turn is always kind of weak, but it's the fact you're doing it every turn after where the value starts really rolling in compared to, let's say, the closest analog people like saying of Guardian with this kind of deck of, all right, swing hammer for 4. My hammer swings for 8 or 10 off one resource instead of 3. And Enigma, compared to other illusionists in the past as well, scales really well off resource economy instead of card economy, which I think is one of the most interesting parts of the hero, where your raw resources tend to translate really effectively into more just damage or board state, but it actually doesn't actually scale that well with more cards in
Mm.
hand. Uh, so like having more of your like random blue block threes isn't really doing much. Having more than 1 or 2 D reacts isn't actually doing much. Having more auras in hand isn't really doing a whole lot if you can't play them out for the best value. But it's the fact that turn to turn, you can turn a certain number of resources into a really effective value and advantage.
Speaking of advantage, Enigma possibly was one of the biggest side beneficiaries of the fabled burning of the books that happened recently, and basically, at least for the time being, put her greatest fearsome kitty gatekeeper Zen into a bit of a hole. You have been playing this deck, as I alluded to before, probably more hours than anybody else that brought her to the Players Championship. You played her through the second half of the AGE Season 2 Open Series. You played her at Nationals in Minneapolis, Amsterdam as well, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, proving my point, you have experienced both an Enigma pre Zen and post Zen, not at all deterred by the menace of the meta. But how does the deck feel pre and post ban?
Pre-ban, obviously Zen was the big boogeyman of the format, and Enigma could kind of prey on everything around it. I personally chose to just accept the matchup for what it was, where it was always very bad. I could make it feel close, especially once I put in the pummels and all of like the big attacks. But Zen was just kind of a matchup I never really went into or sat across from hoping to really win. I usually hoped more to dodge it and prey on everything else around it because plenty of people would show up on Victor or New or something else where Enigma just really tends to apply a lot of pressure better and just kind of steamroll them a lot. Uh, yeah, it basically boiled down to that a lot, especially at bigger events. Where at Amsterdam, my Pro Tour run was basically killed in the water day 2 during CC, where I ran to 3 Zen in a row. Uh, my Battle Harn run at San Diego this year also killed in the water by just running into 2 or 3 Zen in a row. That just tended how to be in the matchup pre-ban list, and then post-ban list Zen just disappeared from the radar. And suddenly, all Enigma has left are good matchups and the mirror.
Mm-hmm. Which
And
we're definitely going to get it in the mirror because it was a massive uh, kind of boogeyman, but also triumph point for you at the Players Championship. And we'll get into that when we go over your specific matchups. But let's go ahead and talk about the list. And since we're talking about pre and post ban, was there any major changes you made right after the banning of the books?
it's funny, after the book bans just warped all of the meta, changed everything for everyone, and then I sat here, I'm like, I guess I can swap out maybe a single card for this player's championship because everything else is the same stuff I play anyways.
And what
All
was
right,
that single card?
goodbye Stonewall Gauntlet. I'm putting in Refractor as a one card sideboard for Riptide.
Amazing. Which is funny because I do think. Am I mistaken? I thought you were packing that Stonewall Gauntlet, Zach.
Not for the player's championship.
You weren't.
Uh,
Okay, cool. I know somebody was. I could have sworn it was you. Anyway, regardless, goodbye Stonewall Gauntlet because goodbye Zen.
I mean, that was a big part of it. I also played Stonewall Gauntlet for Rangers, and planning for the Players' Championship in particular, I didn't expect there to really be more than one, maybe two Rangers tops. And I felt I could beat Azalea fine without Stonewall Gauntlet, and I needed one card against Riptide, which also used to be Stonewall Gauntlet, but I thought Refractor would just give me more equity in that matchup, especially if they're playing more of the unconditional Crucible traps that would just always ping for one, on top of maxing out of all the other traps. So playing Refractor in that matchup would turn off so many of their conditional traps to where it became a much more manageable matchup than in the past.
Since you mentioned Reality Refractor, let's go ahead and take a look at this card because it was made very popular, basically from obscurity to in the public eye, by our friend Tyler Horspool, who is a fellow Players Championship qualifier. Unfortunately, he fell in the early stages of top 8, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, at Battle Hardened San Diego, he was sporting a main board reality refractor list. You are using it very differently. Is this card only in for Riptide, or are there any other matchups you might consider it?
For me in particular, it's only in for Riptide. I know I talked with other people about its potential for more wizardy matchups, specifically Kano, where if you built around Refractor more with like the Spectral Manifestations, Astral Etchings, uh, Kano would have a really rough time into that kind of deck. And I just didn't really have the sideboard slots to have a more comprehensive Refractor package like that. Where comparing to say Tyler Horsepool's Balharn list, where he's on like 9 Spectral
Mm-hmm.
Manifestations, he was between like 6 and 9 Astral Etchings, which when you get that value engine really like, all right, I'm gonna pay one resource and swing for 10 15 damage, and then I have 3 other cards to block with. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't really have the sideboard slots to even approach somewhere anywhere near that. And that's also just a very different style of list than what I'm comfortable with, where I like being a lot more of a proactive beatdown compared to just kind of like sitting back on one aura and banking the victory on that.
Absolutely. There's another card in your list that pretty much didn't make any other Enigma lists, as far as I can tell. However, you've been high on this card, Mistcloak Gully, which is, of course, the fabled landmark that was released in Part the Mistveil. And you've been on this card basically from day one, if I'm not mistaken. So I want you to take a minute and just soapbox this to our entire audience. Tell us why you love this card.
I have tried convincing so many people that this card is the truth. They choose not to believe me because they can't afford a cold foil Mistcloak goalie. There is no other way that they can deny how good this card can be. People look at Mistcloak goalie all the time and think if this doesn't last at least 4 turns, it's such a bad card. And it's like, no, this doesn't need to last anywhere near that long. I'm very happy if it lasts even a minimum of 1 or 2 turns, if it protects my tempo and protects my board. If I transcend it, even better.
Mm-hmm.
Mistcloak goalie turns so many matchups into a frustrating microcosm for the opponent to deal with, while you get to kind of sit back and go, okay, Your 7 breakpoint is now a 6. I 2-card block and don't have to worry about this breakpoint. Oh, your 9 attack became an 8 power that I can block with my unmovable from Arsenal? That's cool. One of the biggest things about this card specifically is the fact that it's a 1-card inclusion against new that makes their life infinitely harder the moment you play it,
Mm-hmm.
because their daggers cost so much to actually use and play out, where if their first dagger every turn swings for 0, they're basically wasting an entire card to do 0, not even like threatening your board. And the longer you keep out goalie to keep that game plan rolling, because it's really easy to do. For anyone who doesn't know what this card does,
Mm-hmm.
it gives -1 power to the first attack of the target to you each turn. And during each player's end phase, as long as you have played, pitched, or defended with a blue card, it will stay alive. Otherwise, Mistcloak Gully destroys itself. If you've done all 3 in the same turn, at the end phase it transcends, which is crazy. And this is also an instant landmark, by the way. It has, the moment I read this card when it was revealed, it had everything I did not want this to have, because I was so happy with Deathmatch Arena as a Fable, where it's like, all right, this is a fun collector piece. I like that. And then I read Goalie and like, this has to be a meta card. There is no way
Mm.
this is not a meta card. And then I became the only person who played Mistcloak Goalie.
Yeah, and you've been a champion for it since day one, and honestly, I was so stoked to give you a platform to show it off on stream. Unfortunately, it never happened. We didn't get to see very much of you on stream, one, and two, when we did see you, it was either in matchups you don't bring it in, or it just never reared its head. I also want to mention really quick, it's really cool counterplay to New Prism, specifically in regards to Great Library of Solana. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this was like a fun thing that came up in testing more, especially in the lead up to a national season, where internally playtesting a lot of the Enigma versus New Prism matchup with Austin Summers,
Hmm.
where we realized the average Enigma also not running goalie meant that we worked out game plan on the Prism side to run library and just vomit out a bunch of auras and generate a lot of value and just draw 5, 6 card hands every turn. But my list kept whooping him in testing, specifically because I had goalie. I could sit on a goalie in Arsenal, wait for him to play library, and then just instantly destroy it on his turn before he could even draw up. Because goalie's an instant, because of course it is. And then afterwards, it would just snowball value, like, alright, all of your heralds that swing for 7 on your first attack are now for 6.
Hmm.
And just, it was crazy in that matchup. Goalie was originally intended as just Guardian and New Tech to make those matchups way easier. And then it, over time, as I played, I'm like, oh, it's good into Riptide because it turns their whole game plan of hit for 1 breakpoint every turn into, oh, this is just a clean 2-card block now.
Hmm.
Or you play into Prison, it's like, all right, Library is just not a card in the matchup anymore because I goalie you. And
Hmm.
if you decide not to play Library, cool, I'm still goalieing you.
It's also one of the I mean, if you talk about the illusionist abused landmarks in general, this one gives you I view it as giving you all the control to keep it around. I mean, if you resolve a great library, you always do have the off chance that your opponent will hit 2 yellows, discard, and destroy your library, which is obviously still good for you. But in this case, like it's all on you whether you want to let it go, transcend, or keep it around.
Yeah, it's been one of the most interesting aspects about Goalie as a Fable is the fact that as a landmark, I think it's one of, if not basically the only landmark that's asymmetrical in terms of with library, if your opponent has 2 yellows in pitch, they
Hmm.
can get the 5-card hand. Or with Deathmatch Arena, that has an effect opponents can get. I forget what it is off the top of my head. Something about getting a gold,
Hmm.
I think.
Corsham as
Well,
well.
goalie, Yeah, Corsham, same deal. Your opponent can reveal stuff and get the effect too. Goalie, it is explicitly locked to just the first attack that targets you,
Mm-hmm.
not targets your opponent or target player for the turn, just you, the owner of goalie. So it just leads to a lot of situations where I've had games with goalie out where my opponent will sit there, realize that they're out to goalie is literally to attempt to pass turn, even with their full card, like full grip in hand still, or just block out everything and pass turn, pray I have nothing to play on their turn to keep it around. Just anything in their power to try and clear this with with ups and downs to it. I mean, hey, if you skip your turn to clear goalie, hey, I'm up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no
Or if
doubt.
they get punished for it anyways, I'm still up because goalie sticks around longer.
Really interesting card, and yeah, maybe underrepresented as you say. Let's go ahead and talk about the rest of this list, Zach. A lot of it is regular fare as far as Enigma lists go, but are there any particular mentions you'd like to shout out?
Yeah, I think the biggest mention to shout out that probably rings out immediately people looking at it is the red Enigma chimeras,
Mm-hmm.
where that's not really a standard thing. Usually you see a lot more Mirage Metamorph as a 1 for 7 with Phantasm with beneficial upside. Meanwhile, I have Enigma Chimera instead, just because this list is based a lot more around threatening 2-cost attacks. Enigma Chimera is definitely one of the best. I've loved Enigma Chimera for a very, very long time, going even so far back as the very first World Championships in San Jose, where I played Enigma Chimera Red and Blue in Dromai to be an aggro beatdown deck at the time. And the moment I realized, I think it may have been like halfway through Mistvale format, where I'm like, oh, this is the perfect time to bring back Enigma Chimera. And I love any opportunity I get to play this card because you just look at it, it's a big number. You can't not love big number.
No,
And of
indeed.
course, the synergy it has with Pummel is it almost doesn't even state it. It's you take big number and you make it even bigger number. It's a match made in heaven.
Big number, good. That's for sure. Yeah, I think this, we even saw a couple instances where this card performed admirably well for you. Um, 2 card 8, who could complain? Speaking of big numbers, though, Zach, let's talk about Phantasmaclasm because even though we had a very high representation of Enigma at the Players' Championship, um, all of the lists were very different from one another, including your list versus Chris Ayali's list, who is our team captain, and also who you met in the finals. And I think that is a perfect representation of how influential this card, Phantasmaclasm, was for you. Um, give me some sauce about this card.
Yeah, when I first picked up Enigma and probably deck building it very, very early on, I wasn't really a fan of Phantasmaclasm. When going through the matchups I wanted at the time, how I was playing them, I'm like, it's like alright into new. It's okay, I guess, into some other random matchups that don't really have that many poppers. Obviously, terrible into KO and a Guardian. And then it was when I finally reached out my playtesting to the Enigma Mirror, I'm like, oh, if I'm not playing Phantasmaclasm, then the Mirror is just so much worse. This
Which
card
is, it's important to
single-handedly,
mention, like that's one of your least favorite matchups to see, right?
yeah, I definitely just I don't like seeing the mirror. I'm not a fan of playing the Enigma mirror. The edges you can get in your technical play feel very few and far between, in my opinion, and they're very hard to successfully capitalize on just because of how much of the mirror is dominated by kind of comparing hands of, ooh, this person attacked better than I could block. I can't defend the board. Or vice versa, where, oh, I can't block. My entire board just suddenly got blown up. And Phantasmaclasm as a card is a big part of this kind of give and take. Because one way to obviously get over your opponent's hand and try and take down their board in the mirror is attacking very tall or very wide. And Phantasmaclasm is a very easy access point to both of those kind of like play lines, because 3 for 9 is obviously very good. It's a great chain ender. It's a great card to play by itself
Mm-hmm.
because it demands minimum 3 cards most of the time. And when you pair it with just other stuff, it gets pretty out of hand. And specifically in the mirror as well, the effect to look at the opponent's hand and bottom a card is absolutely vital, because when your opponent is trying to keep their full grip, because let's say they have a Miragai and they're going to have a big pop-off turn and absolutely destroy you, and then you just Phantasmaclasm and go, oh, bottom Miragai, and go about your day, and now their turn is just potentially ruined outright.
Which you did to Chris Ioli, and then he, funnily enough, drew another manifestation of Mirror Guy. But I totally get where you're coming from. And then the Players' Championship being this tournament that's completely unlike any other tournament, specifically in regards to Swiss rounds, where you don't have an open field that you have to contend with. You know all the players that you're going to sit down across from. You even know your first round's matchup, and you've seen all of the deck lists beforehand. How did that influence the way you built this deck?
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting in that respect, where I went into the new format post book bannings with basically the exact same list as before. I think literally card for card. And then going into AG Players Championship, where again the only card they changed out was Stonewall Gauntlet for Reality Refractor as a 1 card sideboard for literally just Talon Stradley in the room, or if Anthony decided to pull a wild card and show up on Riptide as well. Because I think the deck list as it is, I've been pretty happy with it for a very long time, at least the very fundamentals of it, if not basically almost every card. If not every card, I think it's a deck list that has functioned very well for me, and I saw no reason to change what was working, you know?
Yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Any other special mentions you'd like to make before we move on to the matchups?
Yeah, the 2 big things I do want to point out is obviously the 3 Pummel in the list, which
Mm-hmm.
is, it started out as very non-standard, and then in my collaboration with friend of the channel Austin Kim from Team Metal Fab Tokens in the lead up to Pro Tour Amsterdam, where I managed to convince him to play a pretty similar list to me. I think he played something like 5 cards different.
Mm-hmm.
He took out Goalie, which still not
That's
happy
neither
with,
here nor
but
there.
I'll give it to him. And I know he was also on Haze Bending because a lot of people like that card more than I have. I personally felt that Haze Bending in the past kind of bit me in the behind one too many times, where it felt hard to play Haze Bending from behind. Meanwhile, I kept Shimmers at 3 because Shimmers, if you played it while you're behind, it was very easy to capitalize on to get ahead. Where suddenly, oh, a Restless Coalescence or a Miragai getting a Shimmers counter suddenly very, very threatening value.
Mm-hmm.
And pairing back to Pummel a little bit, I also want to point out Aqualapse in the sideboard as well to go along
Mm-hmm.
with just the idea of playing into aggro matchups where instead of trying to be ultra defensive like other people, instead I want to be the beatdown, and Aqualapse tends to help kind of connect those together with, alright, I have multiple 2-cost attacks, I have a spare resource to bridge them. Aqualapse, give it go again. I still think maybe the craziest turn I've ever had with Aqualapse was at Balhar in San Diego playing against Charles Dunn. He was on Zen, and I lost, but
But
I got to have a turn where I went Enigma Chimera Red 2 for 8, Aqualapse give it go again, second Enigma Chimera 2 for 8, and pummel that, and I got him to like 1 or 2 health. It was
that's
close, but when you're doing that kind of turn, you can't help but feel good.
that's pretty amazing. And it's important to mention we did see you bring this piece of equipment in against Evan Bridges on KO, if I'm not mistaken, in your semifinal round. There was actually some confusion in the chat, wondering like what the heck is in his foot slot because it's cloaked.
Oh, I mean, I brought the Aqualapse in for the finals.
Ah, that's
Meridian
my
Pathway
mistake.
is normal for semis, but yeah, in the finals was against Chris. I'm like, based on our Swiss match, Meridian Pathway didn't really seem to do anything into
Mhm.
how he was playing. I'm going to try something completely different and untested in the finals of a big event, which is always the best decision.
You
And then it
have
never
way more
came up.
courage than I do, Zach. But yeah, it never really came up, did it? I don't think you even had to flip it during the finals.
Yeah, but I left myself open to the possibility
Mhm.
because against his deck, I know he was running more auras, especially like Waning Vengeance. I know he would have more capability to kind of stack up a board compared to me. So I thought in the finals, all right, maybe if I switch it up and just leave myself open to being able to attack him even more to try and make sure I can break through the board if I need to.
And attack him, you certainly did, and we'll go over that in a minute. But first, we got to talk about your Swiss record. It's important to mention here once again that the AG Players Championship, if you didn't get to tune into it, was very different in the way we did our Swiss rounds. The magic number was 3 there. So every player came in with an equal shot at making top 8. The second you got your third win, you ascended directly to top 8. The second you got your third loss, you were asked to leave the room. So Zach, talk to me about how your day began.
Yeah, so starting my day, round one against Tyler Horsepool. He's on Dash.io. I get turn order because for people who don't know a little more about how the format works for this event, uh, the top 16 based on the standings at the end of the open series of the event or of the season gets uh, basically turn selection. So I
Mhm.
was fifth seed while Tyler was lower than me in his final seed. So I got to have turn selection pretty much every round of Swiss, except for round 3 against Chris because, well, he's first seed. So
Mhm.
he always had turn selection in Swiss. And I think it definitely makes a huge difference as Enigma getting to decide to go first or second.
Mhm.
And especially against Mechanologist, where they love going first a lot of the time to this kind of matchup to try and gamble on how many items they can play out turn one, how much they can set up to just try and get over you the rest of the game.
And also to
And
prevent you
instead,
from doing the same, honestly.
yeah. And so gain my opportunity to kind of set up a little turn one and then see where it went from there with Tyler. It was a very very close game. I definitely had classic round one, just like round one brain. I
Mhm.
can't say it was a morning thing because it was afternoon. I can't say I was hungry because it was literally just after we ate the Chipotle catering that was there.
Mhm.
It was just I was making a lot of bad decisions early of like, oh, I'm gonna block with this aura, or like play out this Restless Coalescence instead of holding it in hand because I just need to block damage. And then he pulse wave harpoons me for 3. I'm like, oh, instead of revealing these 3 no blocks, now I have to reveal the card I wanted to play and block with
Mhm.
it. And there was a moment about halfway through the game where I had a choice on an attack coming in for 5, where I had in my hand 2 pummels and a Essence of Ancestry Mind, and I decided to block with both of the pummels
Mhm.
instead of block with a pummel plus the essence, and my turn was just play essence pass, which for the entire rest of the game up until the end, I thought, oh my god, I should have just blocked for 5 with a pummel plus an essence, arsenal the pummel. I'm totally gonna lose here. He had 2 turns that he pulse wave harpooned me at the exact moment I wanted to throw like a big CNC pummel type thing at him. And then we get to the end of the game, and I live at exactly 1 life.
Wow.
And I just barely managed to fatigue him out at the very end when my last few DRX finally started showing up. I'm like, alright, thank goodness. These Fate for Scenes came later rather than ever. Wish I could have seen them earlier, but hey, we take
Mhm.
what we can get. And I guess technically the line I took ended up winning me in that scenario. But it was hard to see in the moment, for especially round one, but
Of course. In round 1, jitters are a thing that happen to the best and the worst of us. It's good to hear that you're human too, because I've experienced that more times than I'd like to admit. Next round was against Grant Strom on new, which is a pretty Enigma favored matchup, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the moment we saw our pairings and Grant goes, out of all the enigmas in the room,
It had to be you,
why
Zach.
did it had to have to be you? I'm like, yeah, all right. So, anyways, report to the principal's office. It's time.
That's
And yeah,
often the way I feel round 3 at these events, Zach, when I see your name on my gem.
yeah, the matchup went about maybe not as well as people would expect off either side. It felt like we both kind of drew awkward for the first half of the game, but Enigma draws awkward better because his hands are full of just attack reacts he can't really do much with, while my weak hands are like, all right, I'm still developing an
Hmm.
aura, swinging something, doing something more than just swing dagger, small attack pass.
Hmm.
And I eventually just managed to grind him down, which is about kind of the matchup goes.
Hmm.
They get low, you play out Maragai, and then their health is just too low to like kind of eat the damage anymore, and you just kind of run away with the game at that point.
So we've got a squeaker of a round 1, kind of a waltz ish through round 2, and then, of course, the first of what you probably are expecting to be many dreaded Enigma mirrors against none other than Christopher Iali.
Yeah, going into this round, Chris and I were talking beforehand of like, all right, there's a few undefeateds here between me, Chris, I think it was also Zane at the time, and Evan Bridges on KO,
Hmm.
and Zane on Florian. And we're like, all right, we can face the other two guys, and we're both gonna have a great time. Or we play the mirror, and we're not gonna have a great time.
Hmm.
And we open the paints like, all right, Enigma mirror, let's sit down and jam. And I think this mirror, this specific match, gave me a lot to learn from Chris's perspective on what he thought about Enigma and especially the mirror, where when we both came out of it, he was like, "Oh man, that was like such a close game. You got me down to like 10 health." It felt pretty back and forth, and I came out of it like, "Man, I hate the mirror. That game wasn't close at all. His board flooded me and I
Hmm.
drowned and I couldn't get over it." And I think that definitely helped me kind of plan around my mindset for when we re-met in finals, especially seeing kind of uh his certain like gameplay quirks of the deck, how he used his traverse the universe,
Mm.
how he would use his auras, and I think a lot of that definitely showed up later for the rematch.
Well, cool. And I do want to get into that, but maybe let's save that little morsel for when we actually get there in our timeline. So, unfortunate loss in round 3. Next up, round 4, going up against Zane, if I'm correct. Yeah?
Yeah, went up against Zane Johnson on Florian, and I actually hadn't played this matchup at all going into the event. I had gone a lot more reps into the Enigma Verdance matchup instead in terms of,
Mm.
like my Earth practice. So I didn't really have any idea what I was going to be doing into Florian. I knew it would be a grindy matchup for certain, just because Florians that I've seen, especially the Yuki Lee Bender list that I knew he was on,
Hmm.
uh, tended to not really go that wide most of the time. It was more trying to just, all right, set up decompose and then try and get like hero power online for late game to get all these rune chants and stuff out. And that was kind of all I really knew besides the obvious big inclusion that everyone has at this point of 6 Summers Fall,
Hmm.
which for people who don't know what Summers Fall is, 2 cost attack. Uh, at red, it's a 6 power, so it's also pauper at red. But I know they only play the reds and blues, where its effect is decompose 2 earth cards and an action card. And if you do, you just put any aura to the bottom of their owner's deck.
Doesn't matter
And so,
cost, doesn't matter
yep.
color, anyone.
And when I first read Summer's Fall during Rosetta spoiler is I was like, oh, this card is gonna be a headache. My Miragai pop off turn is just got being validated by something attacking me for 6 that I can't like do anything about or respond to.
And then you think about the fact that they now have their own kind of mini traverse the universe on board in Plume of Evergrowth, like ready to snatch up one of those Summers Falls and use it against you when you block with your traverse.
Yeah, and Zane even did that to me in the middle of the game when he didn't draw Summer's Fall. So Sage just went, all right, Plume, get back Summer's
Mm-hmm.
Fall, do the thing again. I'm like, all right. This matchup definitely went a lot smoother than I thought it would because once I got through a lot of his early go again gas, like the E strikes, the Rune Rager swarms, uh, he just couldn't really do a whole lot in terms of like, all right, activate grass, make a rune chant, throw some attack between 3 and 6 most of the time, maybe 8 if it was Felling of the Crown.
Mm-hmm.
Where I was just like, all right, I guess I have to like really sit back and just kind of grind it out, counting down his Summer's Falls as he used them, uh, and just not. It felt weird seeing Miragais that I could play, or not specifically play, but like usually use a traverse play for, and like
Mm-hmm.
I had to sit back and really think like, all right, I can't traverse against this deck until way later in the game when either their health is too low to adequately like hold a hand to
Mm-hmm.
use Summer's Fall on, or I'm basically just killing them already with Miragai. And that's kind of what happened here, where I think I finally played my first Miragai when Zane was at like 4 health.
Oh wow.
So by that point, it was just, alright, this first Miragai will eat all of your armor you haven't used the whole game. And the second time, he kind of just couldn't really get through it, and every turn just trying to block with his whole hand until his deck was gone.
Excellent work
Like,
reading
definitely
the
a very
room.
surprising experience for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially when, like you said, you didn't just have that much practice into Florian. Which, don't get me wrong, it's definitely your game to lose in a sense. Where like I don't think any Florian would say it's a favored matchup for them, but just the fact that they have a little bit of counterplay um, does kind of seem to hedge their bets.
Yeah, it felt weird just like not being necessarily the tempo or the beatdown, but just
Mm-hmm.
having to sit there and just present consistent numbers basically every turn while forcing him to basically play his Summers Falls very on demand because he basically wouldn't have a better target
Right.
anyways. So it'd be hitting like a Restless Coalescence with 1 counter on it or a Waxing Spectre, and he never really would get like the big payoff that he would normally want off of it to hit like a
Exactly.
Miragai or a Shimmers.
Well, that round 4, because you hit that magic number of 3, advanced you directly to the top 8. So you basically got to buy round 5. You get to sit back, maybe get a second helping of Chipotle catering, and just relax. Which then takes us to the stressful part. Quarterfinals of top 8. You face up against the boy wonder, Colin Pewter, Colin Erickson, who had just taken down another fearsome Enigma player, Peter Budensic, just the round before.
Yeah, going into top 8 and seeing that I was against Colin, on one hand, I was very excited that I got to look at the bracket and see I was on the opposite side of Chris. So at the latest I'd play another Enigma mirror was the finals.
Mm-hmm.
But going into top 8 and seeing Colin Erickson, like, oh, he's beat 2 Enigma today between Moises and Peter
Mm-hmm.
Budensieg. Something's up here. And it was actually such like a tight game we played. It would have been, I wish this would have been a game people could see streamed just because I'm actually so proud of how much Colin has gotten better at this matchup, how much his tech play has improved, his game plans into it, his stacking. Like, he has gotten so much better. He lost in the end of this match, which took like obviously a lot of work on my end to make happen. Where I drew some awkward hands mid game that were just like full of attacks, or I had a hand that was literally triple Miragai and a Rage Spectre that I needed to just convert into a second or third cycle. And I managed to finally get him with my last two non-cheat cards of the deck, which were CNC and Phantasmaclasm.
Wow.
And that very last attack finally did him in after he got his Raisin Army for 2 turn to like try and even things out and close the game.
That
Like
wasn't
it
an
was
Aqualapse CNC Phantasmaclasm turn, was it?
no, no, no. I spread it out across 2 turns.
Okay.
So
That's
one turn it
scary.
would be Spectral Shield into Spectral Shield into CNC, and then the last one for Spectral Shield into Phantasmaclasm to
Yeah.
close everything out. Since with open decklist, I knew exactly how many poppers his deck had. But even if I didn't have decklist, he had 2 cards at the end that I knew were a Glint and Heart of Fiendel.
Mm-hmm.
So even without open decklist or just a regular Swiss or Top Cut format, I knew I was safe to just kind of end the game right then and there.
Yeah, massive shout out to Colin Erickson because he's just become an absolute terror. I've had him at my locals for his entire career now, and like his meteoric rise to basically winning every armory event at Odyssey has been disturbing to say the very least. So you take down the Boy Wonder, and then on to our local Pasadena supervillain Evan Bridges, also a teammate on the AG Pro Team. Whataburger enjoyer, Mr. 040 himself. This was a streamed game, so you can go back and watch it for those of you watching the Deck Tech now. But talk to me about how it felt going into KO.
This may have been the single match the entire day I was looking forward to the most the moment I saw it was going to happen. For
Tell me
people
why.
who don't know, we have like our own internal kind of banter back and forth between the illusionist players and the brute players, especially between me and Evan,
Mhm.
of who is favored in the Enigma KO matchup. They think they're favored, or at the very least 50-50. I think it's not even close. I have entire formats of data at this point of our own internal testing to back myself up. Meanwhile, all they have are excuses. And this was a real moment, especially on stream, for both of us to put our money where our mouth is on this one. And I got there, of course. Nice Whataburger deck. And oh, it it feels good. It feels good. Always putting Evan in his place.
I could not agree more, Zach, and I consider him one of my closest friends in Fab, but boy do I love to watch him lose. So thank you for that. It is important to note that Evan did kind of brick on some very critical points in that game. I believe there was a time where he got passed with full tempo, and all he was able to do was send Beast within. I think there was a time where he ended a chain with an agile windup, which is a card you never want to be playing. You want to be discarding. So even though it was pretty secure, your victory that is towards the end, that like it was still a good match, man. It was still really close.
Yeah, when we talked after the match, it was actually pretty surprising to at least me, uh, where we both kind of recognized early to mid game he wasn't really seeing his Blood Rush Bellows.
Hmm.
And then when he finally drew the first one, he ended up pitching it for some 2 cost attack. I think it may have been a Bear Fangs, if I
Hmm.
remember correctly, instead of saving it for later or trying to get an arsenal or something. And then when he finally played out his second Blood Rush Bellows, that drew him into the third Blood Rush
Hmm.
Bellows to try and just make something happen. And instead, it was Bear Fangs for 11 when he was searching for specifically a Savage Beatdown, which when we were talking after, he said it was 1 card deeper to
Hmm.
try and throw Savage Beatdown for like minimum 14 damage, I
Right.
think, maybe higher. Basically, whatever could try and rip more cards from my hand. And in the moment, I can see what he was going for. And on my end, if I blocked with another card or had to like pitch into a chi or a hard play out the
Yeah.
Maragai had at the end,
That's
I can see the
interesting.
idea.
When he told me that actually as I walked up, he said one card off. I honestly thought he was talking about the last turn cycle of the game where you came in with an attack for I think like 6 or something like that that he needed to block out fully. He had 1 3 block and 3 pearls in his hand. It was like 2 wild rides and a pulping. I thought that's what he was referring to, but it sounds like it was that savage beatdown. All
Yeah,
right.
it was actually really funny looking at that turn that where I didn't realize at the time
Uh
that
huh.
the play line I took ended up being exact lethal with the amount of block he had.
Right.
Because I just wanted to play the grain that tips the scale to get like the transcend on my turn and get the spectral shield with like 1 extra damage. And then I looked at his hand like, oh, if I didn't have literally this 1 extra damage, he would have just blocked with his 1 blocking card and his Savage Sash to live at 1. But
Hmm.
instead, it was exact lethal with the grains.
Incredible. So you take down Doctor Evil Whataburger, and then you move into the matchup that I mean you basically foretold when you asked me to pull up the bracket during quarterfinals. Like you seemed very positive that if you could just avoid Chris, you would make it to the finals of this tournament. And now you're sitting across from him.
Yeah, going into that finals, especially off the back of losing to him in Swiss, I didn't feel the most confident. I'm never confident at all in the mirror, I feel, for Enigma, just because it always feels kind of super undeterministic in a sense, which for other decks may be a positive. Meanwhile, for Enigma, it's almost like a feeling of dread of knowing it doesn't matter how far ahead I am, one bad hand can just wipe my entire board. But it's also the vice versa of that, where it doesn't matter how far behind I am, I can always come out ahead just through some sheer magic. Or you have the games like what happened on this specific game where it's all right, I'm going to turn 1 Phantasmaglasm Pummel, and that defines the entire rest of the game from there. Just what I ended up doing.
It was absolutely manic to see, especially after Chris just goes ahead and essentially passes on turn 1, doesn't let you do any filtering whatsoever. And then here comes Phantasmaclasm, which already made my heart stop. And then I saw the pummel on top of it, and yeah, I was dead. Now, Zach, you alluded to a bit of an edge, maybe like a like an understanding you reached about Chris during round 3. Can you go into that a little deeper?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me that I came away from that Swiss game was definitely how he would end up using his Traverse the Universe, which an average Enigma playline with Traverse is usually like, all right, I'm going to Traverse specifically because I have Miragai.
Mm-hmm.
And I played around with the idea or with that understanding during our Swiss game, where when he finally traversed, I was like, oh, he's going to Miragai me right now. And then it was, no, he just got it just because he felt like getting an extra blue and pitch for levels of enlightenment. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
huh, this says a lot about what he wants to do here. And our Swiss game was definitely a lot more of him just kind of building up auras on board, with his attacking turns being more defined by stuff like having a Miragai or waxing specters or levels of enlightenment. Like those were his like main aggressive play lines. Like he obviously had like Mirage and Metamorph and stuff in the list, but those weren't necessarily his defining uh, aggro tools in a sense. And knowing he would use his traverse for things that aren't Miragai would kind of clue me in to how I should be blocking or play around what he wants to do at that turn. And you can see in the finals where he ends up just using Traverse for his levels of enlightenment
The
playline.
exact same thing you mentioned that happened in round 3.
Yeah, and I looked at my hand for maybe about, it felt like forever in my mind, but it's probably only about a minute,
Mm-hmm.
thinking if I wanted to try and block out his turn because I reasonably could think I could block it out. Or my hand is absolute gas anyways because it was like levels of enlightenment, path well traveled, and some other stuff. I'm like, all right, this is just the nuts anyways. I can just give up my board and clap back anyways. And I chose the latter line because I knew he wouldn't really have like the most threatening development of a board. which just ended up being levels into like Swing and Ore 2 into Waning Vengeance Pass, which kind of sets him back because I still have my Traverse the Universe to use on a more threatening playline like Maragai. And when he doesn't have his own Traverse and Meridian Pathway to abuse alongside it to protect his board better, it just kind of invites more opportunities for me to be able to overcome his board and close out the game, which kind of ended up happening, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've already talked about drawing the absolute nuts with Phantasmaclasm and a pummel, but I believe you also resolved a Manifestations of Miragai by pitching a chi. I think it was the turn after that, or maybe one more turn cycle later. It was definitely it portrayed a little bit what you've been talking about in terms of your dread about the Enigma mirror, the power of what you draw. Um, and you mentioned it to me in the booth, but I also want to take a second to just highlight that you definitely, like, based on your deck list, you seem teched for this mirror, honestly. Like, probably more so than any other of the Enigma lists I saw that day. Phantasmaclasm did absolute work. Enigma Chimera, all of these really big attacks that allowed you to keep massive pressure on your opponent's ward boards.
Yeah, and it's always funny because I never feel like I'm teched enough for the mirror because of just like the way the mirror swings. Like I could add in stuff that I want more of, like Enlighten Strike for just more generic go again that I can use, or another big attack, or this and that. And at the end of the day, I definitely feel I brought a very strong list compared, specifically in terms of what it would do in the mirror compared to what the other enigmas in the room that day kind of brought, where they were definitely focusing a lot more on the rest of the field and less on the mirror.
Well, Zach, you had a magnificent, not only tournament run on last Sunday, but also a massively amazing run from the beginning of this year all the way through AGE Season 2. You've risen from the ashes by your own admission from an 05, a showing at the January Open, to being the People's and Players Champion in 2024. I must say another massive congratulations to you. It's been awesome watching this Enigma list kind of evolve and then not so much evolve, just get played better and better and better. And if there's anybody to take that illusionist class and hone it into a fine piece of titanium steel, it's you, my friend.
Thank you so much. And fingers crossed for everyone saying Joe might too. I'm waiting.
I'm I'm crossing my fingers and saying, please no, do not give this man a Tomotai again. He's too dangerous with it, especially me being a Ranger player. Well, Zach, it's gotten very late. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and about this really special list.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, Bryce.
Coming up, folks, we've got, of course, AGE Season 3 on the horizon. We'll be back in January. We're trying to extend our horizons a little bit as well. More on that as it develops. In the meantime, you can enjoy myself and a bunch of the other AGE Pro Team streamers throughout the week. Together, we are trying to create a catalog of content that you can enjoy on a daily basis, where you can get the good vibes and the solid testing of people like myself and Zachary Wallach and the rest of the AG Pro team. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great evening.